Hello, I'm Dr. Robin Franklin, and I welcome you to the class Introduction to Curriculum Instruction for Gifted and Talented Students. And as we begin this class, we're going to kind of ground our work in the following ideas and organization called the NAGC, which is the National Association for Gifted Children. And this is an organization for teachers, educators and other professionals, community leaders, and even parents as well, who unite to address the unique needs of children and youth with demonstrated gifts and talents, as well as those children who may be able to develop their talent potential with appropriate educational experiences. So the policies and practices that are put into place are there to really respond to all the diverse expressions of giftedness that we see in our society in the United States. So they define gifted as a person, someone who shows or has the potential for showing an exceptional level of performance in one or more areas of expression. I'd like to take you now to the website. This is the NAGC website. And as I'm pulling it up online, just wanted to kind of show you the ins and outs of the website itself and how it works. As you log in, you would go to www.nagc.org, and as you see right away, it's organized to help those who are searching find what they're looking for. Over to the side, it's going to have different clicks that talk about gifted at a glance. What is gifted? Is my child gifted? Why gifted education? And then you'll see something called common myths, and that's really where I wanted to focus our attention as we get started today, this idea of common myths in gifted education. There are really 10 that they focus on, and we're going to kind of march through these together, the 10 myths of gifted education. For decades, myths about gifted education have distorted educators and the public's perception of what gifted students are able to do and what they need in the classroom. And unfortunately, the result has not been kind to our gifted students. And so I feel like most of it is based on just a lack of knowledge about gifted learners in general. So we want to kind of be myth busters here. We're going to bust some of these myths wide open. So the first one that I wanted to point out is that gifted children will do fine on their own. As I travel from classroom to classroom, I often see some of my very highly able students kind of left to their own devices because they're able to do the material that's presented in class. And I'm here to tell you today that gifted children actually cannot teach themselves. Just as star athletes train with skilled coaches, gifted students need guidance from well-trained teachers who challenge and support them in order to fully develop their abilities. Oftentimes, we find that in a classroom of very diverse learners, teachers have to focus so much attention on those who are struggling, who are not quite meeting benchmarks, so the gifted learners kind of left to their own devices. And so we want to kind of think about that and determine that many gifted students are so far ahead of their same age peers that they know more than half the grade level curriculum before the school year begins. And I found this out right away when I began teaching. I would prepare my lessons well, teach the unit, and my gifted students were kind of knocking it out of the ballpark. 100, 100, 100, and I was feeling really good about myself until someone suggested that I give them a pretest prior to my next unit. And when I did that, they scored 100 before I even started teaching. And that was kind of a wake-up call for me to say, wow, maybe they already know this, and maybe I should do something different with them. So another thing to consider is that others learn new concepts quickly, but are made to wait until classmates catch up. Now, on the surface, that doesn't appear to be complicated until you realize that boredom and frustration can lead to underachievement. And you don't want a highly able student to be frustrated and bored in your class because they will begin to act out because they're not receiving challenging material. So the role of a teacher is crucial for spotting and nurturing talents in our school, and that's where you come in the training that you're receiving. The second myth that exists is that teachers challenge all students. Now, I do faithfully believe that teachers work to their best ability to challenge their students. But most teachers have not been prepared to work with our advanced students. Gifted students not only learn more quickly than other students, they learn differently. And a lot of times, students just receive more work because they're quick, instead of different work that they need to be challenged. So here's what we know. The majority of classroom teachers have had no training in teaching highly able students. In spite of commitment and dedication, teachers are often unable to recognize and support gifted learners without this specialized training. Myth number 3, gifted students are role models for other students. Could be true, but average or below average students do not look to the gifted students as role models. You think back to the day when that student in one of your classes always was the student making 100. They weren't always well received in the classroom setting. So students oftentimes model their behavior on those who have similar capabilities and are coping well in school. Here's what we know. Watching those who are expected to succeed does little to increase a student's self-confidence. That's what research is telling us. And gifted students respond to and benefit from classroom interactions with their academic peers, those who are on the same level as they are. Research says that's when they often excel in the classroom. Myth number 4, all children are gifted. And you know, I've heard that my whole life. All students are gifted, all children are gifted. They just open their packages at a different time. I've heard that a lot. I don't want to dispel that idea that all children are extremely unique. And so I do want us to know that there are strengths and positive attributes to every child. But not all are gifted in the academic sense of the word, the definition that we've already discussed. The label gifted in a school setting is applied when a child has an advanced capacity to learn and apply what is learned in one or more subject areas or in the performing or fine arts compared to others his or her age or grade. So here's what we know. Advanced capacity requires modifications to the regular curriculum. And oftentimes you hear that word modifications in reference to students with special needs. And I'm here to say today that our gifted students do fit into that category of having special needs. And so their work should also be modified. Gifted does not signify good or bad or better. It's a term that allows students to be identified for services that meet their unique learning needs. So that's what we're here in this class to begin to think through. How do we indeed provide modifications and different types of curriculum for our gifted students? Myth number 5, academic acceleration is socially harmful. You often hear, oh no, we're not going to accelerate students because then they would be out of match with their age bracket and therefore that would be harmful for them socially. Well, gifted children are often happier with older children who share interests and abilities. I found that out as well when I was teaching, and I had a student who was extremely bright, and she, instead of taking the time to interact with her peers, she wanted to interact with me. She would spend her recess time or her lunch time wanting to have some real strong conversations, and she just wasn't finding that match with her age group peers. So when it comes to acceleration, interventions can be flexible in the curriculum delivery to meet the students' needs. And sometimes many gifted students just don't have the intellectual or interest peers at school, which we just talked about, which can lead to some social and emotional discomfort. Accelerated students go on to succeed professionally at high levels than those in the general student population. And once out of school, they often report that they wish they'd had even more opportunities for acceleration while in school. So this looks different in different places and will be a lot based on district choice of what they decide to do, where students are at, but the acceleration just of the curriculum is something that we certainly can modify and discuss as we go through this class. Myth number 6, gifted education programs are elitist. Gifted education programs help all high-ability students. Many students are denied learning opportunities because of flawed identification practices and the way in which programs and services are funded. And here's what we know. Gifted learners are found in all cultures, ethnic backgrounds, and socioeconomic groups. So I just want to take a moment to let that sink in. They're found in all cultures, ethnic backgrounds, and socioeconomic groups. Single test score reliance for gifted education services may exclude students with different cultural experiences and opportunities. Without federal or state funds providing an adequate funding stream, most gifted education programs and services are dependent solely on local funding. And in spite of the need, often only higher income school districts are able to provide services, giving the appearance of elitism. Myth number 7. Students getting poor or average grades, they can't be gifted. Not all gifted students are academically successful. In my experience as well, oftentimes they may be the student who isn't turning in their work. They might be the student who feels like that work is really beneath them, so they just don't do it, and they're the ones showing up oftentimes as being unorganized. So just because a student is highly able does not make them highly organized and motivated. Here's what we know. High ability students may become bored or frustrated in an unchallenging classroom, causing them to lose interest, learn poor study habits, or distrust the school environment. They may mask their abilities to try to fit in socially. Students may have lacked access to a rigorous, high-quality early education. So all these causes of underachievement, they differ. It's imperative that we're perceptive, we're well-trained, and we can recognize gifted learners and break that cycle of underachievement that we often see. Myth number 8, gifted students are happy, popular, and well-adjusted. Actually, school can be a negative experience for some of our gifted students. Although many gifted students flourish in their schools, some are prone to emotional and moral intensities. It's important that counselors and other school personnel are trained to recognize these issues. And here is what we know. Gifted students may be sensitive to others' expectations and feelings, struggle with perfectionism, and you'll see that word pop up a lot, and I'm sure by now in your experience as a teacher, you have seen that play out in your classroom, what that looks like, to always want to have and be excellent in what you do. And so they also have some deep concerns about societal problems. They feel very deeply about topics. Students may not share interests with their classmates, resulting in isolation or even being labeled a nerd. Time in school is often something to be endured rather than celebrated. Myth number 9, a child receiving special education services can be gifted too. And that definitely is a myth. Having strengths in one area does not preclude the need for support in another. This idea of being twice exceptional, I've seen that happen in many places, where a student was really struggling and had a reading disability, but was gifted in mathematics. And what that looks like for a program for a day for that student, those who are willing to make those modifications. So it's important to focus on a student's abilities and strengths, providing access to challenging curricula in addition to receiving support for that disability. We often call those students twice exceptional. They often go undetected because their disability precludes them oftentimes and kind of masks their other gifted area. So appearing average often causes ineligibility for either gifted or special education services. Twice exceptional students are often identified for special education services, but aren't always considered for gifted services. So we really want to change that. into a new direction. Myth number 10 is gifted education programs require an abundance of resources. Offering gifted education services does not need to break the bank. Starting a program requires understanding and commitment that gifted students require different services. So here's what we know. Effective and comprehensive gifted education services require an investment in professional development, assessments, and advanced curriculum, just like the class you're taking right now. Gifted education strategies need to be flexible and varied. So, going back to the idea of giftedness, now that we kind of have dispelled some rumors, what does NAGC say? We've already mentioned this, but I want to be a little more specific. Gifted individuals are those who demonstrate outstanding levels of aptitude, and that's defined as an exceptional ability to reason and learn, or competence, documented performance or achievement in top 10% or rare in one or more domains. Domains include any structured area of activity with its own symbol system, mathematics, music, language, and or set of sensory motor skills such as painting, dance, or sports. So we're moving now into the state ideas about giftedness. So what does South Carolina define for giftedness? And there's a regulation, 43-220. Gifted and talented students are those who demonstrate high ability or potential in academic and or artistic areas. So it's a little more general in the definition. You can see between the two kind of the comparisons. Well, I want to back up even further into the federal definition of giftedness. So we've looked at NAGC, we've looked at the state. So now let's think about what is the federal saying about giftedness. And this was based on a 1972 Marlin report to Congress, and it's currently housed, if you want to say that, in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And they say giftedness, students, children, or youth who give evidence of high achievement capability in areas such as intellectual, creative, artistic, or leadership capacity, or in specific academic fields, and who need services and activities not ordinarily provided by the school in order to fully develop those capabilities. So let's do a mashup there. All those definitions leads to you. What would you consider to be your definition of giftedness? And if you haven't thought through that completely, throughout this class, we're going to revisit that idea, what you consider to be your idea of giftedness. So that's one thing I want you to consider. The other thing, at this point, do you feel comfortable working with gifted learners? And why do you feel comfortable? And we're going to have an opportunity for you to share that information, what your definition of giftedness is, and why do you feel comfortable working with gifted learners. I did want to show you this because I really feel like this is such a nice visual to think about gifted education in America. Okay, so I'll give you just a moment just to kind of overview this slide. Approximately 3 million American students, K through 12, which is about 6% of the student population, are considered to be gifted. Of that population currently, when this was developed, 1/4 of the gifted students fall into the category of Hispanic and African American. 3/4 of those 3 million are white/Asian. Of our 50 states, state would claim that they have some type of gifted education going on. Look how many teachers would like to have professional development and gifted education. Nine out of 10. Of the 3 million American students that are labeled gifted, 360,000 of them have a disability and are gifted. So it's safe to say at this point that every state has an excellence gap. And this can be found for the Council for Exceptional Children. Going back to our slide, I want to focus in on this area. If indeed we said before that every population has gifted students, and some don't have more than others, why then are there too few kids of color in our gifted services and gifted programs? It's just a few stats here. Blacks represent some 20% of public education enrollment, but they constitute only 4% of students who perform at the 95 percentile or above on a standardized test. And this is from Dr. Ford in a book that she has published called Reversing Underachievement Among Gifted Blacks. You can find that book at Pre-Rock Press. However, it's been known for over 200 years that potential giftedness is equally distributed among all races and cultures. So how do we account for this clearly unequal distribution in our public schools? And I'm asking the hard questions today because this is something we really need to think through as educators. We need to be hyper aware of how we can change some things. Underrepresented populations in gifted education. Outstanding talents are present in children and youth from all cultural groups across all economic strata in all areas of human endeavor. And here are just a few areas that I want us to think deeply about. Minorities, females, rural, learning disabled, students from low SES, or just that group of underachievers. This is a picture that I actually used in my dissertation for gifted education, and I did mine on underrepresented populations. And this was one of the photos that I used in my slideshow. And I just kind of want you to think through, why would I use an iceberg to represent this population I consider to be underrepresented? And I don't know if you know much about icebergs, but what you see is only just a tiny bit of an iceberg. What's visual? What you see beneath the surface is so much more. And so that just became kind of a symbol for me when I was thinking through these students who are often missed, who are unrepresented. So I want to share that with you today. One thing that I deeply learned from my study is that we need to cast a wider net. And in casting a wider net, we need to have kind of a continuum of beliefs about gifted students. If I stood over here, this is where I would love to see gifted identification and thought be. You see some word choices here. Inclusive, potential, practical, expansive, multi-criteria, fluid. And it's a continuum because I dare say we haven't reached over here yet. But I really don't want us to be over here. So I kind of want us to look at these word choices. is the gifted identification that you see, and is it exclusive? Is it performance-based, theoretical, narrow, single criteria, and fixed? If that's the way it is, then we really need to consider how to move in the direction of this and think differently about our students. So I just kind of wanted to see, where do you think, if you looked at your identification process in your district, in your building, how students are considered for gifted services, where do you see that falling? And just think about that. I do want to say that it's real important when we do work with our gifted students to think through some ideas. And if you were here with me today, I would ask specifically for you to give me examples of how you see this play out in your classroom with students. Students who may have an intensity, a heightened sensitivity, good problem solvers, abstract reasoning, thrive on that challenge, they're curious, they have a vivid imagination, they're sensitive and complex. Sometimes they tend to be perfectionist. I remember my first year teaching a self-contained gifted class. It was the first day of school. We were going to have a great day. And one of the practical things that I taught the students was how to design their name and the date on the paper, the heading, so to speak. I introduced it, I showed what it looked like, and then we went to our first kind of assignment for the day, and I suggested that they use the new format that they had just learned. And within about 2 minutes, I looked back, and one of my students was just sobbing. And I was like, oh dear, this is the first day of school. How could you be crying? And so I went to her and knelt down beside her, and I said, oh, what is wrong? How can I help you? And she said, I didn't put my name in the right place on the paper. She was just in pieces. And I said, oh, goodness, we're not going to cry about that. I said, we can fix that. It's not a big deal. And she said, I just cry. I get really upset, and I'm very sensitive, and I cry about everything. I said, well, I'll tell you what. Every time you think you're going to cry, you kind of look to me, and I will kind of give you the thumbs up or thumbs down, like, this is not really something you should cry about. And I'll kind of just guide you through the process. So throughout the year, I would often look back, and she was getting ready to be in tears, and I would be like, no, this is not something we're going to cry about. And she would recover herself. And then one day, there was something pretty big that happened to her. And I said, it's okay. You can go ahead and cry now. So it's just that idea that they're really key about being perfect. And so to help them move beyond that and just really care about them for who they are as a person and not what they can just do is a real gift that you can give to a gifted learner. They learn rapidly. They had extensive vocabulary, excellent memory, reason well, curious, so funny. Some of them had such a keen sense of humor. High energy levels, just really can get into an interest and stick with that one interest. Question authority, which can be a bit of a challenge, very alert, and they often have a great number of interests. And I want you to think about all these things. Are all these things positive, or are all these things negative? And so, as always, we can look at these things and help students move into a more positive aspect instead of the negative. And it's real important to understand the characteristics that come along with a gifted student. When we talk about curriculum, and kind of finishing up for this session, curriculum, good curriculum for our gifted students needs to be both rigorous and rich. And in order for it to be rigorous, it has to have the following characteristics that I'll let you see: insight, knowledge, thought, skills, effect, and products. And it needs to be rich. It needs to be coherent, relevant, powerful, transferable, authentic, and meaningful. And so throughout this class, we're going to work on those two things to see if our curriculum is both rigorous and rich. and to see if it's appropriate for our gifted students. So there is a test, House test of appropriate curriculum. So when you are planning something for a gifted learner and you want to know, is this really good for them? Is this a good lesson for a gifted learner? You need to think of the would, the could, and the should. The would is, all students want to be involved in such a learning experience. The could all students participate in such a learning experience? And the should all students be expected to succeed in such learning experiences? And basically what he's asking is, oftentimes when we develop curriculum for gifted students, if every single student you have could participate in it, maybe it's not the best for a gifted student. And we'll talk through more of those ideas as we go on. I do want to point out a few things that we just know are negative curriculum for advanced learners. So if you're like me, when you first learned about gifted students, you could check all these things off and say, yes, I do that, yes, I've done that, yes, I've done that. But I just want to be a kind of reminder. We have found through research these things aren't great for gifted students. Fact-based, worksheet-driven, text-driven, uniform pacing, test-driven curriculum, use of single standard criteria, and the gifted student as a tutor for the weaker student. Now, to help us through this journey, there are some standards that are in place. Thinking back to the NAGC, you can find this on their website. I've also attached it in a file for you on Blackboard. That there are standards pre-K all the way through 12. And it's really a blueprint for quality gifted education programs. And so we're going to delve into that more so you can begin to see what makes up really strong curriculum for the gifted learner. And you can, once again, find it at the website, all the standards